Well, here we are. It's another Mental Health Monday, and we are really glad that somehow, some way you found this video and are watching it today. My name is Kathy Escobar, and I'm with The Refuge, along with my friend Joe Rainey and Nikki Kennedy. And so all three of us are connected to The Refuge, and we all three do different things as well. But our heart on Mental Health Mondays is that The Refuge would be part of offering support during this wild and crazy, unexpected time of living in a global pandemic. And one of the things that we know for sure is that we're all intersecting it with in different ways. So it's affecting each of us differently, but we all need support to be as healthy and integrated and solid as we can through this really disruptive time. So Nikki Kennedy is part of the Refuge community. She is a trauma therapist, and she's also a professor at CU Denver. And she has been a huge part in the Refuge of helping us work on becoming a trauma-informed community. Trauma-informed people and trauma-informed community means that we're looking through that lens at all times. And so we're really excited to have her here today, and we hope always that somehow, some way you can glean something from this.
Yeah, so if you have a chance, there still again will be questions underneath the description box in YouTube. Just this week I had a friend who lives overseas who didn't have anyone to discuss it with, who sent me feedback and just the answers to the questions in an email. So however it works to interact with the content, I would encourage you to do that, whether that's with someone else or journaling, but really just to let these things we're learning kind of sink in and apply them and not just kind of ingest them. So I'm excited to hear what our friend Nikki has to say today.
Hi, thanks Joe and Kathy. I'm really excited to be here sharing today. One of the things that I think is really important right now is, as a therapist, I tend to work a lot with people's inner lives. And right now, I think a lot of us feel like our inner lives have become very explicit. And so I'm going to name that, like we're making the implicit explicit by saying, yeah, we are all participating in some form or fashion in a global pandemic. And how that is affecting us personally is really important as we discuss it explicitly out there with the rest of the world, how we intersect with our daily lives, whether our kids are in school and now we're homeschooling, whether our lives were feeling this way before, the different ways that we're affected by the pandemic. And so making the implicit experience, that experience that goes on internally, explicit, naming what's going on. And so what I mean by that is I want to name that we're going through a traumatic experience together. And we are going through that both personally and globally. We're doing that communally. We're doing that in our families. We're doing it with our kids' schools. We are all involved, whether we want it to be or not, in this global pandemic. And it is a traumatic experience. So trauma is an interesting word. I don't know about you all, but it's become a lot more of a word in my world. It's not a word I used a lot. Of course, I'm a mental health professional, so I am talking about it all the time, but that I hear the word trauma out there a lot. And I wanted to define that for us so that we are understanding what we're talking about. And you'll find yourself somewhere in this list now for sure. So trauma is an event experienced by an individual that's distressing, and it's different for everybody. It can be circumstances that cause physical, emotional, or psychological harm. There's complex and adverse experiences that last for a long time after something like this is over. Trauma can be an individual or a communal experience, so family, system, a generation, and now we're talking about a global world. It can be epigenetics, which is the environment over time that causes chemical modifications in the body, surrounding a person's genes, turning them on or off. It could be stress injuries, which is another word that we use in the mental health community for PTS and PTSD, so post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so those are all definitions of a trauma. And we can look in our past lives and we can see, you know, prior to the pandemic, we can point to times where we've been in a trauma or experienced a trauma. And now we are all going to point to this time as a time where we experienced a global trauma, something that has affected the entire world all at the same time. But it's individual as well. Everybody's story of the experience is going to be different. And so it's important to understand that we are intersecting with this in so many different levels. So what does trauma look like? If I'm experiencing it, how do I know? Okay, I know that this global pandemic is going on, but maybe I mean, what does it look like? So here's a little list for you to think about. Trauma can look like agitation, mood swings, anger, anxiety, panic, addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociation, self-blame, survivor guilt, illnesses, headaches, migraines, pain, behavioral problems, hospitalization, grief and loss, difficulty maintaining relationships, you name it, you might be experiencing it. These can be effects of trauma. And I wanted to highlight here, for many of you watching, you might be parents. What do you see in your kids off this list? Do you experience in them yourself? Do you see your kids? Who's tantruming? Who's reverting to some behaviors they hadn't done in a while? What are your teenagers going through? These are all really good questions for us adults to think about, those in our community and those that don't have even less power over what we're going through than we do, the adults, right? And that can really be helpful in understanding why some family dynamics might be happening that are distressing for you. It's trauma. It's a traumatic experience. It's the effects of trauma happening to you or someone else. The second part of that I wanted to mention today is, along with trauma and the experience of trauma, is something called vicarious trauma. So many of us, though we are sequestered in our homes, we may be working, we may be homeschooling at the same time, we may be blissfully experiencing Netflix nights or our lives, you know, wherever we find ourselves. Most people are not being hospitalized at the moment with COVID-19. So, but we are all feeling the effects of this trauma going on globally, and that is called vicarious trauma. Another word you may have heard is secondary stress and secondary victimization. And so what happens is, when a traumatic experience is going on, those that hear about it are surrounded by it, affected by it, work in it, hear about it, watch it, etc., caregive for somebody, we can experience something called vicarious trauma, which is, even though I may not be going through the literal experience of COVID-19 myself, like literally having it and hospitalized and on a ventilator, I'm experiencing pain, agitation, frustration, fear, grief, and loss, because that's happening in the world somewhere nearby me. And so that's really an important thing to notice, is that around us these kinds of things exist, and we may wonder, why am I experiencing this? Or why, you know, personally, I'll tell you, for me, I live with a certain level of pain, and I've been experiencing a lot more pain, like little physical pain lately. And sometimes I blame it on this, sometimes I blame it on that, but really, I really think that part of my stress, my secondary trauma, my experiencing of quarantine is a much higher rate of physical pain. My husband's having trouble sleeping. We've had, right, like all of these things can be and are part of our experiencing of this collective trauma. So what do we do about it? What do we do? I'm in quarantine. Can't necessarily go see a therapist. Perhaps my life doesn't allow me to see a therapist. Perhaps I don't even know what a therapist is. And that's not something in my world. So what do I do? What do I do with these feelings? How do I reduce the symptoms of either the trauma that I'm living through with my family or the vicarious trauma that I'm experiencing? Being in community, talking with people, making the implicit experience explicit, naming what I'm seeing, naming what I feel, naming to somebody, reaching out to somebody else, saying yes to watching something like this, taking care of my body the best that I can. This is really hard. And I will just share from my experience, it's really hard for me. I have 2 kids at home that are homeschooling. I'm trying to work. I'm teaching students. I'm seeing clients. And I'm feeding everybody 3 meals a day for at least 5 weeks at this point, and it doesn't look like it's ending. And it's a lot of times it's too much. It just is. It feels overwhelming. It's exhausting. My pain levels start shooting up, and I wonder, how long can I do this? I don't know. And that's the thing. We don't have an answer to this, right? And so for me, sometimes this looks like laying down for a nap, if that seems possible. Sometimes it looks like binging some Netflix. A lot of times it looks like crying and letting the feelings come out. A lot of times it looks like just saying honestly how I'm feeling and how I'm doing, and not trying to stuff it in and keep it in and keep like a strong face for something. One takeaway that I wanted to show you, and I'm not sure how this will come across, and maybe what we can do is post this in the comments, but we can take something like this called a self-care wheel and look at all the different parts of the self and determine maybe what needs a little bit of attention. So the parts of the self: physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, or professional. And we can look through this and determine, well, maybe there's something on this list that I could do that will help bring some soothing to my soul. And sometimes I kind of go like this, like, hey, I see you, right? I'm here. I see you. I see that you're hurting or you're tired. And what could we do, right? It's hard during this time. You know, I often, for me in my normal world, a walk down to my coffee shop, or a walk around the block, or a hug from a friend. I'm an extrovert. I'm huggy. And these are things I can't do and be right now. That's really hard. Like the ways where I ground myself back to me, I can't do. And so I'm, again, naming something that is hard to do. And so I'm finding new ways to kind of come back to myself and spend some time here, right? Like self-love, self-affirmation, these things that I can give myself for a moment, even though I can't alleviate what's going on in the world and I can't change the circumstances right now. So that's what I have for us today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to interact with you some as we go forward on these Mental Health Mondays.
Thank you so much, Nikki. You know, just these little reminders of really being honest and like letting it out. So we're grateful for you to share, and we're really looking forward to having people engage and really think about, answer the questions, reflect on them, talk to somebody about them, look at the self-care wheel and think about ways that we could draw something from it. And like our heart on all of this is just anything that helps, take it. We're glad that you're here.
Thanks, Nikki. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, friends.